the Medicare doc fix. I mean, this is an actual bit of entitlement reform that they were able to achieve fairly harmlessly, and in a quiet manner, and it's not being championed. And there is a lot of talk that that is something that the Republicans really would like to try to tackle, and they see it as only possible with a Republican president.
And let's just think about take a step back on the demographics for a second. While all that is true, and I absolutely believe all of that, let's remember that a decade ago we were talking about the rise of the moral majority and how there was going to be a permanent red America, right? Mm-hmm. That has changed, right? And you hear people like Ted Cruz saying, we need to get more evangelicals out to the polls and all that. So, times can change in American politics. I think one issue, immigration in particular, is someplace that I think a lot of Republicans think if they could have gotten past immigration reform, they would have had a chance to get some of those more conservative Latinos, but still haven't been able to get past that.
Well, the fact is, with Hispanic voters, they're overwhelmingly vote Democratic now. Immigration is one big reason why, because Republicans have taken such a hard line. But as our friend Chuck Todd pointed out on a panel I was on with him last night, many of them are very conservative on social issues and other issues, and in some ways, in terms of their ideology, a natural fit for Republicans if only the GOP could get past this immigration issue.
And that's why it's going to be so interesting to see how they evolve, if they do, in the course of this presidential primary, because you do have particularly Jeb Bush out there saying, look, I'm for comprehensive overhaul of the immigration laws, including a path to citizenship, and I'm not moving.
The Quinnipiac poll, which we mentioned earlier in this hour, also had some Republican numbers, and it showed Marco Rubio, the freshman Florida senator, getting kind of a boost from his announcement, now edging ahead of his former mentor, Jeb Bush, although it's there's not really a Republican frontrunner. It seems to be 15% for Rubio, 13% for Bush. But Marco Rubio apparently off to something of a start.
He's certainly gotten a boost in the polls, but like you said, it's a low teens, which is not exactly an overwhelming majority by any stretch. Yeah. And let's also remember that in 2007, at one point in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, Donald Trump led in a poll. So, Ben Carson just a month ago was number 2 in one of the polls. So I think we'll see a lot of movement, but there's no doubt that Marco Rubio is kind of everyone's second choice at this point. A lot of Republicans see him very favorably. They could see themselves supporting him. And if Scott Walker or Jeb Bush falters in any way, Marco Rubio is right there to shoot through.
Going back to the legacy question we talked about with Karen a little earlier, I've had a lot of young Republicans tell me they really like Marco Rubio in part because they don't want to see somebody from the Bush family. It's not necessarily that they didn't like George W. or that they're worried about legacies, but they think that he can be a real viable alternative.
The Bush name, an asset in some ways, a liability in others for Jeb Bush. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue your calls, your questions, and we'll talk about those FBI arrests of ISIS supporters in Minnesota, of all places. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm Susan Page of USA Today, sitting in for Diane Rehm. It's our Friday News Roundup. We're joined by Christina Bellantoni of Roll Call, Domenico Montanaro of NPR, and Karen Tumulty of the Washington Post. We had FBI arrests in Minnesota of ISIS supporters. How did they find out about these young men and make the connection with ISIS?
Well, I know that the department and FBI have been tracking a lot of what's happened, in the Somali community in particular, for a very long time. And I think that they've had people on the ground looking at what's going on in the community and trying to see, kind of lure them into whether or not they would take up arms and go elsewhere. So this, I think, has been part of a long running, monitoring by the FBI.
It's still alarming, I think, to a lot of Americans, Karen, that we have people in this country, some of them citizens, some of them not, who are trying to go to Syria and join ISIS.
And it's also the way they are being recruited. They're, in this case, you're talking about 6 young men, ages, from 19 to the early 20s. And they were engaged in what the FBI called peer-to-peer recruiting. They were recruiting each other, sort of, it was truly, truly homegrown terrorism, or, wanting to be terrorists. And, they were on their way to San Diego and were planning to cross the Mexican border. This plot had been going on for 10 months. But again, it's when these things sort of start organically within communities in the United States, it's much more difficult for law enforcement to sort of figure out what's going on.
Well, we're talking about law enforcement. Let's talk about the head of the DEA announced retirement over the handling of a sex scandal. Tell us what happened there.
I mean, for me, I have followed the story very closely, but the Republicans, again, had a field day with it, even though I believe she's a holdover from the previous administration.
Well, anytime you have, sex parties involved with a government agency, I mean, that is going to be a public relations nightmare. And I think it was a matter of time, that she was probably going to have to step down.
Well, and in this case, we are talking about prostitutes who were some of the, in part, arranged by Colombian drug gangs, which, if you're the DEA, is a real problem. But the fact is that there's been a lot of consternation in that agency. There have been, the House Oversight Committee, an IG report. There's been a loss of confidence that's been gradually building, and I think the sex scandal was just too much, and Michelle Leonhardt had to step down.
The White House pointedly did not express support for her, Karen. This comes after the Washington Post exclusive reports about misbehavior in the Secret Service that won a reporter for your paper a Pulitzer Prize. Congratulations on that.
My colleague Carol Linnig. It was really amazing too.
Yeah.
I sit fairly close to her in the newsroom, and there was a point at which she was getting scoops on the Secret Service so fast that she literally couldn't leave her desk, and we were having to bring her food.
But it must erode confidence by Americans in law enforcement generally to hear about these scandals involving the Secret Service and the DEA, which are two federal agencies with storied histories. We've seen TV shows about their exploits. I mean, it is alarming, I think, for a lot of people.
But when Carol was giving her speech after her Pulitzer Prize was announced, she said something that I found very moving. She said, it's also the fact that public servants within these agencies were willing to recognize a problem and risk their own careers to bring these problems to the fore is really kind of inspiring.
Yeah.
And she's inspiring too. I mean, I would say it's just such a testament to great beat reporting, right? She earned that trust and really clearly got to know very inside sources that could provide us information that really shed light on something that the American people care about. And this comes at a time when law enforcement on the whole is under more scrutiny in this country.
I do think, though, that some of these agencies are going to have to do a lot of soul searching and figure out how they can not just be more make people more accountable. But I think the bigger issue is, a lot of these Secret Service agents have complained about their hours and that they don't get a lot of flexibility. They don't get a lot of time off. And anytime that you have, and I know people aren't going to feel sympathetic on that, but when you talk to psychologists and you think about the science of what it does to you, I mean, anybody who's covered a campaign and been on the bus or been on the plane, there are things and ways that you act that are not ways that you would normally act if you have a good work-life balance.
And not to even mention the fact that DEA agents and Secret Service agents and police officers put their lives on the line all the time.
Stress is enormous.
It's got to be. Well, let's go back to the phones. We'll talk to Bob. He's calling us from Miami. Bob, welcome to the Diane Rehm Show.
Hey, good morning. Good morning. I just want to ask a question with regard to the way the reporting is I guess, the reporting industry, the journalist industry. I know that right now that everyone is focused on police involving incidents with black men, but I would like to see some parity, because in that same city in Baltimore, last year of August 2014, a 3-year-old girl was shot in the head. Two groups were, I guess, talking to one another. A guy pulled out a gun and shot. The stray bullet went down the street and hit her in the head. A 14-year-old boy, young man, was killed recently in Baltimore. You've had violence in Baltimore for a decade, black on black, if you will. And I don't see that parity. I don't see us trying to report on those type of incidents and also talk about the responsibility and accountability in those areas, because this kind of thing is happening seems like every day. And I would like for the media to focus more on that, so that my life matters, not only when police shoot me or do something to me, but when someone that looks like me also does it. Thank you.
Bob, that's an important point. We've had cases here in Washington, D.C. where kids have been hit by stray bullets.
Yeah. So I don't know the particulars of this particular case that he brings up, but from a journalism question, one thing you've seen in newsrooms across the country is cuts, and in a way that you don't focus on what I was just saying about great beat reporting of, a law enforcement agency. You don't cover police and crime in the same way. And a lot of, as local newspapers shrink or have resource issues, there's not as much focus. And one of the reasons why police violence has risen is because of all of the prominence of video and things that we've been able to see and tangibly get our hands around, and then the television networks take it up, and then it becomes a bigger issue. So in a lot of ways, I feel like if people want to make something an issue, like, they need to bring it to the attention of the national media, and then sometimes that can be something they regret because it becomes more of a circus and less about the tangibles.
Bob, thanks very much for your call. We're going to go to Dallas, Texas. Let's talk to Ted. Ted, you're on the Diane Show.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just had a comment in regards to, I think, something you guys alluded to earlier, and it was about the Republicans and the White House and their chances actually for getting in. I just want to make the point that they don't really need to. They are doing pretty well on the local area, getting elected in the Senate, in the House, and also in the local municipalities. So the presidency itself, I mean, it's kind of a weak position, but getting in all of these positions where they have the ability to make laws and make legislation, I mean, this is the place they want to be.
Hey, Ted, that is such a great point.
Ted is also calling us from a state where Democrats have not won a single statewide office since 1994, my home state.
And even as they have problems winning the presidency, they've got control of the House. They've just won control of the Senate. They have gotten control of more and more state legislatures.
I mean, there's no doubt that all that is true, and that Republicans have built themselves a foundation that, but don't be fooled. There's a reason why there's going to be, a couple $1 billion or more spent to try to get the White House, because with that kind of foundation in place, Republicans, if they're able to take back the White House, think about what that would mean across the country and the kind of legislation that they would be able to pass, related to every issue of importance across the spectrum. So I take the caller's point, but the White House is that ultimate prize.
Let's talk to Kevin. He's calling us from Indianapolis. Hi, Kevin. You're on the air.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Yes, good morning.
I wanted to address the White House election. With nothing but respect for professional journalists who get to spend all their time following campaigns and analyzing these issues, I think sometimes you all overthink it. My prediction is I don't think the Republican Party can win the White House for the next 3 or 4 national presidential elections. And I say that because they are so out of touch with the middle class and the working families in the United States. They are dominated by the radicalized Christian right, and more Americans are very alarmed by what they see in the news and social media about the radicalized Christian right. And then the Republican Party is also dominated by the Tea Potters, which are so far out of touch with most of America, and, by the way, very inexperienced politicians.
So, Kevin, I'm going to guess that you're not going to be voting for Republicans yourself, but how about that? What does the panel think about his dire prediction, if you're a Republican, that the next 3 or 4 elections, presidential elections, you're just cooked?
I think 3 or 4 elections is very difficult to see out. I mean, we're talking a long time. That would be unprecedented if that were to happen. I think that the Republican Party, though, understands that some of the issues that he's talking about, especially in income inequality, they realize that they have to figure out a way to overcome this demographic issue that they do have, whether it's being present more in minority communities or dealing with immigration reform so that they can get past some of this. It's difficult to get through a primary, and I think that is obviously their challenge right now. I think, I do take his point, though, that sometimes we do overthink it because we do get to do this, 9, 10, 12 hours a day and are looking for a storyline. So I think it's better to take a step back.
Also, sometimes we're just wrong. That would also
and there's no accountability.
One of the things that's so refreshing about politics, and one of the reasons I still love it, is that I'm surprised constantly. I mean, Eric Cantor's loss over the summer is one nobody saw coming. And what actually happens is that voters and actual human beings talk to these candidates and watch them on a debate stage, and they start to make the decisions and they get to decide, and we get to talk to them.
I'm Susan Page, and you're listening to the Diane Rehm Show. If you're just joining us, you can also watch live video of this hour at drshow.org. Well, President Obama hit the road this week to talk about climate change. He went to Florida, Karen. That's a place of kind of a friendly locale if you're going to talk about climate change.
He did. He went there on Earth Day, and it's a battleground state. The governor did not show up to greet him. The Rick Scott, the very conservative Republican governor of Florida, did not show up to greet him at the airport and claimed that the White House has been withholding money for the Everglades. But we have two leading candidates from Florida running for president, Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush, who have expressed some skepticism about the degree to which human beings are responsible for climate change. The president got up and mocked Senator Inhofe, who had shown up on the Senate floor last year with a snowball to point, or maybe it was earlier this year, with a snowball to point out that it was pretty cold winter. I think Florida is not only a key battleground, but also a place where a lot of these things come into play.
We have to take this out of the rhetorical conversation because it is an actual dire issue, just the environment in general. Like, take out, political leanings or whether you believe it's man-made or not. There are massive consequences happening right now across the planet that, when it is still an issue of Republicans think this or Democrats think this, or Barack Obama is making fun of Jim Inhofe, who says global warming is a hoax, we will never accomplish anything. And it is actually happening. We talk about Republicans winning at the local level. Governors and states are doing so much more about this than the federal government has even considered doing for years.
But of course, it's a political issue, and it's something that's going to play in the campaign, because the fact is, Obama went there. It's something on Twitter. We like to talk about Twitter trolls. He was sort of going there to troll Republicans because it's an issue he feels like he can lean in on, because he can say, this is not something you can omit. You can't just omit the word climate change and think that it's not happening. And that's a reference to what's happened in Florida, where there's a controversy around whether or not officials were allowed to say the words climate change. Obama knows what the politics of this are. He knows what the numbers are, and he knows Marco Rubio has said, I'm not a scientist. And he's perfectly happy dropping grenades like that into a Republican primary and having to make them answer for it.
We have seen some Republican governors try to address the impact of climate change without saying the words climate change or acknowledging that the conclusion of most scientists that it is caused by human behavior.
And House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy told Roll Call in an exclusive interview we published Monday that he wants to make the drought in California a very top issue in Congress, and that he's trying to work with the California delegation to come to some compromise. Now, he and Barbara Boxer are very far apart on their beliefs about what causes the issue. He says it's overregulation, but the fact that somebody so prominent in leadership wants to elevate this issue, potentially might get at some conversation.
Karen, you mentioned that the Republican governor of Florida didn't show up to greet the president when he arrived. Is that unusual?
I think normally what's unusual in this day and age with politics being so polarized, but I think that 5-10 years ago that would have been extraordinary. And now it is sort of the par for the course, I guess.
I mean, I wonder, no matter what your political leanings are, it feels like public officials ought to be treated with respect, whether they're the governor or the president.
Think about when Rick Perry greeted Barack Obama on the tarmac during the child migrant crisis, when the president landed in Texas. I think that was early last spring. And, the media covers these landings obsessively, and you get a list from the White House of who's going to greet the president. It might be the mayor, the dog catcher, or the local, school guard. But, governors traditionally will be there, or at least some high representative. And so, yeah.
But then think about what a political minefield it became for Chris Christie after Sandy. And, some conservatives who still want to blame him for Mitt Romney winding up losing because he had embraced President Obama too strongly. There's so many things President Obama, if he coughs, Republicans will be against. You didn't see that on drones this week, which was another topic you can look at. But, I think that it has become way more tricky, as Karen points out, the politics now than the sort of getting together. This is what I'm bringing home for my state is not exactly Republican politics right now to be able to tout I'm bringing home the bacon.
Of course, you could think of it not as greeting Barack Obama, who you oppose, but greeting the president of the United States. Yeah. That would be a way to think about it. Has that affected the way people here in town address each other, like on the Hill? Karen, do you see, just a certain, with some of the old traditions gone?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a real sort of coarseness to it. There is a real lack of respect for the office. And if you have a lack of respect for the office, you have a lack of respect for the people who elected the people to this office.
Karen Tumulty of the Washington Post, Domenico Montanaro of NPR, Christina Bellantoni of Roll Call. Thanks so much for being with us this hour.
Thank you.
I'm Susan Page of USA Today, sitting in for Diane Rehm. Thanks for listening.
The Diane Rehm Show is produced by Sandra Pinkert, Denise Couture, Susan Casey, Rebecca Kaufman, Lisa Dunn,